Grayson Noble.
Today is the first lesson that you are going to learn in terms of dispensing optics. Before I go and delve into various topics, you will have to know about the eye. What is an eye and what are the parts of the eye? So let me begin with teaching you about some important parts of the eye. Number one, which I consider as important, is retina. Retina is nothing but a tissue lining at the back of the eye. It works like a camera. When light enters the eye and focuses on the retina, an image falls on the retina, inverted, and then it triggers the nerve pulses. When it triggers the nerve pulses, these nerve pulses are converted and sent through the optic nerve to the visual cortex, where the image gets processed. So what is a retina? It's very simple. It's like a screen at the back of the eye, a tissue where the light falls and focuses, an image falls on it, and then gets converted into pulses and sent to the brain. This retina also has some light receptor cells, which are called the rods and cones. And what are the rods and cones? Rods are basically, which are responsible for dim light and black and white vision, whereas cones are responsible for color vision. Alright, so this is what it is simply to be learnt about in terms of retina and the light receptor cells. As soon as the light falls on the retina and then gets converted, the nerve that takes it to the brain is known as optical nerve. This is enough for you to understand nothing more. There is an optical nerve attached to the retina which takes the pulses, nerve pulses, the light which gets converted into the nerve pulses to the brain, where the vision gets processed. That's all for here. Now going forward, we will also learn about other parts of the eye. The white part of the eye is called the sclera. S-C-L-E-R-A, the sclera. So what is this sclera is all about? Sclera is, of course, as I told you, the white of the eye, and it is opaque. It's an opaque tissue. So what is an opaque? An opaque object is where light cannot penetrate through it. So if it falls on it, it gets reflected. So opposite of opaque is transparent. We will also learn about some parts which are transparent. Transparent means light enters and passes through. There is another thing in between which is called translucent, where partial lights pass through. So sclera is an opaque substance. It does not allow the light pass through. But it is attached to some extraocular muscles where we can see left and right. Alright, so we talked about retina, we talked about rods, we talked about cones, we talked about optical nerve, now we talked about sclera. Going forward, we will also learn about other parts of the eye. And right now, we will discuss about ciliary muscle. What's a ciliary muscle? A ciliary body is nothing but which is attached to the crystalline lens, and because of the contraction and rarefaction of the ciliary body, the ciliary muscle, the lens changes its shape. Now we will talk about the ciliary body. What's a ciliary body? The ciliary body is the body which is attached to the crystalline lens, and because of the contraction and rarefaction, the lens changes its shape. For example, if the ciliary body contracts, the lens thickens, and therefore we are able to focus on the objects which are close. While looking at distant objects, the ciliary body relaxes, the lens thins, and thus we are able to look at the objects which are at distance. What happens over a period of time as we grow old, the ciliary body loses its elasticity. As a result, we have problems in reading, and thus it's called, we develop presbyopia. All right. Now we will discuss about cornea. The cornea is the most amazing and important part in the eye. You can touch the cornea with your own finger. It covers the iris, the pupil, and the anterior chamber. And in fact, cornea refracts 2/3 of the eye's optical power. For example, if we have plus 60 diopters of optical power in our eye, the cornea constitutes 40 diopters of the optical power. Can you imagine that? And cornea gets 90% of its oxygen from the atmosphere and 10% of the oxygen from its limbus. So what's the cornea? The cornea is a transparent tissue. Remember that. This is the only transparent bloodless tissue in the whole of the body. Cornea is the only transparent bloodless tissue in the whole of the body. It refracts 2/3 of the optical power, close to 40 diopters. All right. And it covers the iris. It's in the frontal part of the eye. It covers the iris, it covers the pupil, and it covers the anterior chamber. Cornea gets 90% of its oxygen from the atmosphere and 10% from the limbus. That's enough to remember. And what about corneal metabolism? Let's talk about it now. So the corneal metabolism is all about taking the fluid from the aqueous humor. There is aqueous humor. Aqua, as you say, it's water inside the eye. It takes the fluid from the aqueous humor and also from the limbal cells. And immediately there is a pump which ejects the water out. Don't have to talk much about it, remember much about it, but just that cornea needs nutrition, right? So it takes the nutrition from the aqueous humor. That's enough to remember. And going forward, we will now talk about the crystalline lens. The crystalline lens is an amazing object. Again, as I told you, if 2/3 of the optical power gets refracted by the cornea, the rest 1/3 of it gets refracted by the crystalline lens. The crystalline lens is a biconvex lens, and as you grow old, the lens loses its elasticity, and also when it gets exposed to ultraviolet rays, it also loses its optical power. So as a result of it, you will also get cataract. So the lens changes in color, which we will discuss in detail about it later. But what happens most importantly, since crystalline lens is attached to the ciliary body, it is able to change its shape, and that is called accommodation. Now, the ability of the crystalline lens to see at near, intermediate, and distance, automatically fluctuating its position, is very important, and thus we are able to focus objects at different focal lengths. And this is an amazing feature of the crystalline lens. So what's a crystalline lens? Crystalline lens is an important part of the body which refracts 1/3 of the optical power, and it changes its shape in accordance with the position of the object as we see, and this process is called accommodation. And you don't have to remember much about it. These are the important points which I will give it to you in literature. Just remember them so that you can reproduce it in a proper way. Alright, so now next we will be talking about iris. Iris is able to regulate the amount of light that enters our eye. It is attached to sphincter muscle. The sphincter muscle enlarges and contracts the iris, so that accordingly the aperture, which is otherwise called the pupil at the center of the eye, changes its size. And iris color is considered to be the color of the eye. Some people have brown, most of us in India have brown, and some people in the Europe have different blue and green and wonderful colors of the iris, known as the eye color. Eyelids. We blink a lot, every time, every day. Almost 13,000 times a day. Do you remember? Do you imagine? It just happens so naturally. And it is important to blink because our lacrimal glands secrete fluid, which is known as tears. While we blink, the eyelids blink and clear the debris. If we don't blink and don't regulate the tear film, then our eyes will get dry. We'll talk a lot about dry eyes later, but it is important for you to know that blinking of eyelids is very important, because most people don't do while they sit in front of electronic devices, laptops, TV, whatsoever. As a result of it, they develop dry eyes, or if it goes beyond, it's also called computer vision syndrome. So blinking of eyelids is very important because it regulates the tear film. Now, what's a tear film? A tear film consists of 3 layers, which is the mucus layer, the aqueous layer, and the lipid layer. The lipid layer is the outer layer. It's an oily layer which protects the tear film from getting evaporated. And the major part of the tear film has the aqueous layer. Aqua, as you know, is water. So it's important to have enough of water inside the eye, on the eye, so that we are able to see properly. Otherwise we get dry eyes, which means our eyes will be itchy, and we get all kinds of discomfort. Now we will also talk about today aqueous humor. What is aqueous humor? Aqueous humor, as you know, it's a clear gelatinous fluid between the cornea and the lens. It gets secreted by the ciliary body, and it's a very clear transparent liquid. It gets secreted. Along with, also we have vitreous humor. Vitreous humor is also a transparent gel which is between the lens and the retina. It fills up most parts of the eye inside. So this is also important to know. Not much, but at least something that we have 2 humors inside the eye, which is the aqueous humor and the vitreous humor. Now we have 2 chambers. One is the anterior chamber and one is the posterior chamber. Posterior chamber, not much to talk about because it's between the iris and the suspensory ligaments. But most important is the anterior chamber. Anterior chamber is between the iris and cornea's innermost part, the endothelium. Right? So what happens is there is fluid which is falling in the anterior chamber. If the pressure between 10 to 20 mercury is not being maintained properly, then we have an issue with the eye. In other words, if it exceeds or if it comes down, then we had issues which is called glaucoma. We'll talk more about glaucoma in diseases, but for now, today, we'll end here. See you soon.